Another episode of the Kyle Anslone Show. This is another special episode, a breaking news episode that we're bringing to you live today, as there is just so much developing on the war in the Middle East. Will this ceasefire hold? So many questions I want to break down and answer. And of course, Trump has been an absolute wild man over the past 48 hours. And so I want to kind of break down what the president is saying, what we should take away from it. And of course, that's hard to do because he's flip-flopping all over the place. And so there's certainly a lot here to go through today. I want to start off talking about the ceasefire, get into the results of the U.S. strike on Iran, the impeachment against Donald Trump, and wrap it up with how the Republicans so quickly shifted to support Donald Trump in the strikes. So first off here, I have this post from Truth Social. Donald Trump put this out Monday night. Really, again, just a wild statement. It says, "Congratulations to everyone," all caps and exclamation point. "It has been fully agreed by and between Israel and Iran that there will be a complete and total ceasefire in approximately 6 hours from now, when Israel and Iran have wound down and completed in their final progress in their final missions for 12 hours, at which point the war will be considered ended. Officially, Iran will start the ceasefire, and upon the 12th hour, Israel will start the ceasefire, and upon the 24th hour, an official end to the 12-day war will be saluted around the world. During each ceasefire, the other side will remain peaceful and respectful on the assumption that everything works as it should, which it will. I would like to congratulate both countries, Israel and Iran, on having the stamina, courage, and intelligence to end what should be called the 12-day war. This is a war that could have gone on for years and destroyed the entire Middle East, but it didn't and never will. God bless Israel. God bless Iran. God bless the Middle East. God bless the United States of America. And God bless the world." And of course, Trump is signing all of his own tweets right now in all caps. So first off, I just want to put out that this statement and some of the other ones we'll read today, I think we should be seriously questioning Donald Trump's mental fitness. He is a very old man at this point, and he seems just absolutely, on both sides of, just on Sunday, he's posting on True Social that we need regime change in Iran and MEGA. And today he's talking to reporters on Air Force One and said, "No, I don't want regime change in Iran. It would bring chaos to the Middle East." And so he's just absolutely all over the place, intermixing in these like all cap statements and God bless each country. It's just really weird things to be posting in his social media posts. And I know a lot of people like to read into this as Donald Trump playing 4D chess, and certainly, I guess we can't dismiss that possibility, but I also think one thing to look into is how is the president's mental health, because he's all over the place in his remarks. Now, this ceasefire took a lot of people by surprise. Remember, it was Saturday night that we had Operation Midnight Hammer, where the U.S. drops bombs on 3 Iranian nuclear facilities. On Monday, we get the Iranian retaliation, which is a largely symbolic missile strike on the Al Udeid Air Base, the largest American Middle East air base in the Middle East. But all those missiles were down. Iran gave the U.S. a heads up on it. We actually have Trump on Truth Social thanking Iran for letting the U.S. know that they were going to attack a U.S. military base. Again, just really interesting things to have the president saying so openly in his social media posts. It's unclear right away if Israel and Iran actually signed on to this ceasefire, or if Trump just decided it was a time for a ceasefire and declared one, because in the initial aftermath, you have high-ranking Israeli and Iranian sources saying that they didn't agree to this ceasefire. There's also other reporting that the Israelis are the ones who asked for this ceasefire. I really don't know the truth at this point about how this ceasefire actually originated, because if we did, we would have a good idea of which side was actually more or less suing for peace and feeling like they were in a real bad spot. A lot of speculation that it was Israel that actually went to Donald Trump and they said, we got to call this thing off. We don't have the interceptors to keep downing these Iranian rockets. We have a lot of people dying within Israel. And I mean, not a lot compared to like Gaza or the number of people dying in Iran or Israel's killed in Lebanon. But for Israel, the Iranian strikes are turning out to be lethal. They're getting around air defenses. And so I think there's good reason to speculate it was the Iranians that were, or excuse me, the Israelis that were actually behind the suing for peace here and wanting an end to this conflict. And the Iranians, they essentially don't have a choice. If Israel wants to de-escalate and Iran keeps escalating, then we're going to end up with Israel or the United States using a nuclear weapon in Iran. And so I've kind of compared the situation where Israel pits a fist fight with the Iranians. And so now the Iranians are in a fist fight with the Israelis, but Israel has this big friend over on the side known as the Americans, and they also have a pistol in their back pocket called a nuclear weapon. And so Iran had to be very careful. They can't really outright win this conflict. They can't do too much damage to Israel, or Israel will resort to their nuclear weapons, which will completely devastate Iran, or they'll drag the Americans into the conflict, which again, overwhelming force will completely devastate Iran. And I think there's probably little that Iran could really do if the U.S. really brought down the full might of its air force on Iran. It would certainly cause a lot of devastation and destruction, even if they can't necessarily get on the ground and defeat the IRGC. It would be an absolutely miserable situation for the Iranians if the American Air Force and missiles started raining down on their country. So we have, this ceasefire overnight. There's reports and complaints on both sides of ceasefire violations. And then Tuesday morning, we get some really interesting statements from President Donald Trump. Let's play this first clip.
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I'd never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. When I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the f*** they're doing. Do you understand that?
So, I think this remark from Trump is interesting on multiple levels. One, this is the most critical statement that a U.S. president has made of Israel, probably since something Obama said near the end of his administration about settlement expansions or something like this, that, Donald Trump was very candid that he was not happy about how Israel was handling the bombing strikes on Iran. So this is very interesting. But then the post that we're getting from Trump on Truth Social, as Israel is apparently preparing to retaliate against the Iranians, we have this first post from Donald Trump. It says, Israel, do not drop those bombs. If you do, it is a major violation. Bring your pilots home now. President Donald Trump, President of the United States of America. And then this second post, Israel is not going to attack Iran. All planes will turn around and head home while doing a friendly plane wave to Iran. Nobody will be hurt. The ceasefire is in effect. Thank you for your attention to this matter. And so again, this is absolutely wild. Trump going on social media to attack, a U.S. ally and to say, you will not do this. Now, apparently this was coupled with pressure from behind the scenes. Axios reporter Barak Ravid, who is, of course, an Israeli shill. He is a former Israeli army intelligence officer, member of, I think, Unit 8200. And so he's into covert operations and psyops, and is effectively a plant in the media who relays information from Tel Aviv. But the information that you get from Tel Aviv, this is Barak Ravid is putting out the official narrative according to Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. And so that's why his reporting is so interesting. And so he's talked to Israeli officials who said Trump had a very direct and frank conversation with the Israeli prime minister. And, you throw your hands up in the air and you're frustrated with this because is this the first time? Like, why hasn't Donald Trump used this before? If he just has to get a little tough and talk a little tough with Benjamin Netanyahu, well, that doesn't seem like it should be so hard to do. So Trump should engage in this tough talk. And this is something that people who have wanted both President Biden and now President Trump to squash the Israeli genocide in Gaza, they say, look how easy this is. All you have to do is have one difficult conversation with Benjamin Netanyahu, one conversation where you put your finger in his chest and you say, listen here, Bibi, we're in charge. You are the client state. You take our money. You need our military. You need our weapons. You need our intelligence, not the other way around. Israel is America's unsinkable aircraft carrier in the Middle East, but you're just a branch of our military. You are not in charge around here. The Pentagon is the head of the global empire, not Tel Aviv. And get that straight and understand your role. You could act belligerently in the Middle East only when it serves the interests of the United States of America, not when it serves the interests of Tel Aviv. And making that very clear to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has seemed to be effective from multiple presidents. This is certainly something that Trump should have done sooner, that needed to be said sooner. But now that was finally said, it seems that they were able to prevent the Israelis from carrying out an attack that they saw as retaliation for an Iranian ceasefire violation when the Israeli planes were already in the air. I mean, I think that's a real show of force from Donald Trump here. And again, in reining in a U.S. ally. And I guess, one of the things I want to point out here is that I do think this is the Donald Trump that people voted for and wanted to see. The Donald Trump who is willing to stand up to the U.S. client states who somehow have come to dominate our foreign policy in Washington, D.C., like Zelensky, like Netanyahu, right? When Donald Trump and J.D. Vance had their big blow up with Zelensky in the Oval Office, Americans cheered. And the next thing they said was, we want the same exchange to happen with Benjamin Netanyahu. We need you to rein in our allies. And so it's great that that happened. However, Donald Trump reining in Netanyahu here is really only bringing us back to where we were at the end of the Biden administration, because for weeks and weeks and weeks, Trump allowed Netanyahu to run our foreign policy, to dictate, to allow us to get into a direct shooting war with the Iranians that never needed to happen. Even if it only ends up being this one-off strike, it should have never happened. Never happened. And it only happened because Trump let Netanyahu guide him into what could have been another completely foolhardy, long-lasting entanglement in the Middle East. Now, with this ceasefire coming into effect, I have to say it's good news. I don't want to immediately come on here and just dismiss and say, oh, it'll never hold. But I think there's a lot of reasons to doubt the survivability of this ceasefire. There's two really good pieces of analysis by this, one by Trita Parsi and one by Andrew Day at the American Conservative. And essentially what they both say is that Israel could agitate and find ways to basically embroil Trump back into this conflict. And if Israel is going to, either through more covert actions, like carrying out assassinations in Iran, hitting their nuclear facilities and things like this, then that is going to really escalate the situation in the Middle East and could lead to an Iranian response. And then these two countries are back at war, and the U.S. very quickly could once again get drugged into that conflict. And then, of course, the other thing going on here is that Israel is still attacking and invading three of its neighboring states, Lebanon, Syria, and Hamas, or Gaza. And you have Hamas and the Shia militias of Syria, and Hezbollah, southern Lebanon, and also the Houthis in Yemen, who all take offense to what Israel is doing by expanding their borders, taking territory, committing a genocide in Gaza. And so whenever the Houthi attacks resume and they're attacking Tel Aviv, whenever Hamas strikes back against Israel, whenever if Hezbollah tries to kick Israel out of southern Lebanon, Tel Aviv is going to scream, "It's Iran, it's Iran, it's Iran." And that's going to, fuel all this, hatred in the United States, and all the Hawks are going to feel reinvigorated to demand their, Lindsey Graham, Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro will all be back in Donald Trump's ear saying, "Mr. President, you have to do something. You have to deal with these Iranians. You hit them once, you did a good job, but you got to hit them again. You got to get them in line." And I think Trump, by bombing Iran, kind of took the genie out of the bottle, and he's not going to be able to get it back in. He's not going to be able to reverse what's been done. He has set the precedent that he is willing to strike Iran. And so now, and maybe until the end of his administration, every single night, Mark Levin will be on the airwaves every day. Ben Shapiro will be on the Daily Wire podcast. All these hawks are going to be constantly agitating for Trump to do it again. Iran's a threat. You have to do it again. And part of the reason that they're going to come back to is apparently the U.S. strikes on Iran weren't quite as successful as the president initially claimed. No surprise there. I think on the last episode of the show, Dan McAdams was already really speculating that these strikes were not very effective whatsoever. But now we have some reporting. This is a U.S. intelligence assessment that was reported on in CNN. The title of the article here is "Exclusive: Early U.S. Intel Assessment Suggests Strikes on Iran Did Not Directly Destroy Nuclear Site, Sources Say." And so CNN reports the U.S. military strikes on 3 of Iran's nuclear facilities last weekend did not destroy the core components of the country's nuclear program, and likely only set it back by months, according to a early U.S. intelligence assessment that was described by 4 people who were briefed on it. And then this is important because people are saying, well, this is CNN's reporting. Very true. Always be skeptical of CNN or is reporting. But the White House did confirm it, and what they basically said to dismiss it was, "This was leaked by a low-level loser." That's actually a quote from the White House press secretary. And so the informality and unprofessionalism that originates with Donald Trump has certainly worked its way down to the spokesman for the White House at this point. I mean, I can't believe that's how you would confirm an intelligence assessment from the U.S. intelligence community, but that's what we're getting from the Trump administration. So again, this is important on multiple levels. One, Iran was not building a nuclear bomb before the U.S. attacked their nuclear sites. And so this assessment that Iran's nuclear program was set back by months is a little bit misleading because they were never trying to get a nuclear weapon in the first place. So if Iran would have never built a nuclear weapon if Israel and the U.S. didn't attack, and then the U.S. and Israeli attack set back their nuclear program by a few months, and Iran decides to build a nuclear weapon, well, practically, we've actually accelerated Iran's nuclear program by giving them the administration to do so. I think it's very unlikely at this point that the Iranians don't kick out the IAEA inspectors, they don't withdraw from the non-proliferation treaty, and they don't build themselves a nuclear bomb in secret, and then in a few years will declare that they have a nuclear arsenal of their own, and any country that launches an offensive war against the Islamic Republic will be wiped off the face of the earth. This is the Pandora's box that Netanyahu and Trump opened by bombing Iran. And you can't close it. There's no going back from this. I think Trump is maybe going to try to negotiate a nuclear deal from here. But from the Iranian perspective, diplomacy was already used once as a feint, as a deception, in order to allow Israel and the U.S. prepare for these massive strikes that they carried out on Iran. I mean, make no mistake, they might not have done massive damage to the nuclear program, but they have wreaked havoc on Iran. And I'm sure the Iranian people are doing a couple of things. One is rallying around the flag, and two, rallying around the cause that Israel must be dealt with. That we have to do something that hit back at Tel Aviv, because it's run not only by a madman, but now an entire government filled with absolute genocidal lunatics who not only want to wipe out the Palestinian people, and that's not an exaggeration. Itmar Ben-Gvir, Bezalel Smotrich, hell, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, all completely deny the existence of Palestine or Palestinians. And so, this government in Israel is completely radical, but not only that, they're very much into territorial expansion. They're annexing Gaza as we speak. They're annexing the West Bank as we speak. They're taking larger and larger chunks of southern Syria and have, I think, most of the southern Lebanon that they want. And so if Iran is just going to sit on their hands and make another nuclear deal, it seems like there would be a very fair calculation to make in Tel Aviv that you're basically only setting back your destruction for a few years while Israel finishes up their territorial expansion and then rebuilds their military, builds new interceptors to come after you next. And so I definitely think Iran will be on the path to a nuclear weapon after this. Now, one somewhat positive story to come out of all of this is that a member of Congress introduced articles of impeachment for a useful reason for a change. This was Al Green, somebody who I rarely, if ever, agree with, did introduce articles of impeachment against Donald Trump for an unauthorized attack, for abusing war powers, for usurping congressional war powers. Article the first article, section 8 of the Constitution, explicitly grants war-making powers to the Congress. And really the only bad thing about this impeachment resolution was the congressman who introduced it, because he's maybe not the most articulate or intelligent, but I did want to play some of his remarks on why he moved to impeach Donald Trump.
Our country is nearing a moment of decision. We are at the intersection of democracy and autocracy. HRES 537 has been filed because I believe that the President of the United States has committed an impeachable act, abuse of presidential powers by disregarding the separation of powers, devolving American democracy into an authoritarian government, usurping congressional power to declare war.
Well, once again, unfortunately, this isn't the most rousing, the best speech. I would have loved to hear Thomas Massie introduce this and actually sit there and explain to the American people why this was such a bad thing. But again, I'm glad these articles of impeachment got introduced. Now, a couple other points on this. One, they held the vote on this today. The Republicans introduced a motion to table it, which effectively kills it. That did pass 300 and I believe about 50 to 49. Among the Democrats who voted for it are Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi. And I think this does a lot to expose those members of Congress who are constantly whining and complaining that Donald Trump is, a threat to our democracy, that he's violating the Constitution, that he's a dictator, he's an authoritarian. And then the most authoritarian thing he does, the worst violation of the Constitution he has committed to date, is the one that they completely ignore or endorse. Why? It's because they've sold out to AIPAC and the Israel lobby, and if the Israel lobby didn't want this, so they didn't vote for it. Now, I just want to mention, there's been a lot of impeachments against Trump that I have been opposed to. I'm not just somebody that wants to kick Donald Trump out of the government. That being said, it was the one impeachment effort that I thought was a good thing. The first one, based on the Russiagate nonsense, was awful. The second one, based on the January 6th stuff, wasn't much better. And this one is the only one that I think was worthy of getting a yes vote. And I'm just disappointed more members of Congress didn't vote for it. Now, last up here, I wanted to bring up this poll from YouGov that looks at the Republican support for bombing Iran before the attacks and after the attacks. And so, before the attacks, not only Republicans, but every single demographic measured by YouGov, so income level, education, if you voted for Harris or Trump or a third party, didn't vote at all, conservative, liberal, whatever it was, they were all universally against bombing Iran. And then after the US bombed Iran, one demographic flipped, and though that was the Republicans. And so it seems that a lot of Republicans, about 69%, are just on board with whatever war Trump wanted to wage. I mean, it was like a 50% shift from before to after. I think only 19 or 23% of Republicans supported bombing Iran before it happened. After Trump does it, 69% of Republicans support bombing Iran. Republicans, you have to get more critical of your president. Yes, you like him because he has an R next to his name and he talks tough on immigration. But he also promised you a lot of other things that are really important to this country, including avoiding unnecessary wars, not getting into more regime changes in the Middle East. And that is the exact path the president is going down with these strikes. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning into this another special breaking episode of the Kyle Lanslone Show. Be sure you subscribe on the YouTube channel. That way, whenever we go live with one of these breaking news episodes, you could get a notification. You could hop in the chat. You could ask questions and things like that. But if you're just listening on X, we really appreciate that too. Share out the show. And I'll be back with another episode tomorrow. Dr. Ramsey Baroud joins me. Thanks, everyone.